Sitting with me here today is Donna Braquet. She's the long-term director of the Pride Center. We thank you for joining us today, Donna. So Donna, to begin, could you tell us about your background, how you came to the University of Tennessee, how you came to be the director of the Pride Center?
Sure. I came to University of Tennessee, Knoxville in 2004 as the life sciences librarian. At that time, there was nothing on campus related to LGBT efforts. Shortly into that year, I met up coincidentally with a professor in the School of Information Sciences, Dr. Mara, who also did research on LGBT issues, and we sort of bonded in the fact that we similarly had come from more progressive areas and then were here together in a place that was very much isolating. And so we sort of forged a friendship and started to do research on LGBT issues and campus climate. There was no communication among LGBT faculty, staff, and students on campus. People knew of each other, but there was no way to share ideas or share experiences. And so one of the first things we did was create a campus-wide listserv so that LGBT folks could find each other and sort of work together to find solutions and to make campus climate better. So another thing that came from our study was that there was no official body at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville that was looking out for LGBT faculty, staff, and students. The first thing that we tried to do was to create an LGBT commission. So Dr. Mara and me and one other person requested a meeting with the chancellor at the time, who was Chancellor Crabtree. That was in November of 2005. And that meeting went really well, and that chancellor said, "You're right. We need something like this. It's past time. This is the right thing to do." And so we left that meeting very energized and very excited and hopeful. Lo and behold, though, it took over a year for that agreement to actually turn into the creation of the Commission for LGBT People. So in a way, that was a little bit disconcerting that it took so long, even after it had the chancellor's okay. Even just being on this campus for a year, it was easy to see the hesitation and the resistance and the fear of retaliation from the legislature. I mean, that was what was given as the reason for why we could not move forward on lots of things. During that year when it took so long to sort of make something happen, it was very telling. And I think that had we not been so persistent with following up and keeping a record and pushing forward, it would have been really easy for that to sort of just disappear and go away. Had any of the three of us moved away, were sidetracked, or if we hadn't continued to sort of make sure that happened, I think it would have been easily something that could have fallen by the wayside. Another example, even after it was created, we were told specifically that, well, there won't be an announcement about this. We don't want to make a big deal about this because we don't want them to catch on to what we're doing. Because we said, well, how will then people know that it exists, right? If there's not an announcement of it. We were expecting this to be, again, a sign that campus is changing. But we were told, well, this will be sort of slipped in with news about all of the commissions. So they definitely, I would say, were calculated and strategic and purposeful not to catch the eye of people who they thought might be upset about it. So in a way, it was a little bit bittersweet in the fact that we got what we wanted, but then at the same time, we also got the message that, okay, we're going to do this, but you're still not okay. You're still not worth taking the risk for. To people who are LGBT and deal with coming out, that open acceptance and visibility to people who have maybe sometimes in their life had to be closeted or have to be not who they are, being open and having someone proud of who you are and being proud of yourself and having an organization that is proud to announce that this commission exists is just as important as the commission existing itself.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the climate was like?
It was like stepping back in time, and the fact that when I was at Georgia Tech, I was out, but it wasn't a core identity. I was a science librarian. I was many other things. it wasn't a big deal. I was in Atlanta. The campus was very open. When I came here, it's almost like being a lesbian became one of my primary identities because it was so lacking here. It was very isolating. It became a big deal. Isolating is the word that I keep coming back to. Is very much alone, very much invisible. That's why that became so primary to the things that I was doing here. I was a science librarian, but that almost became secondary to what I saw as something that needed to be done here at UT. I didn't see anybody else doing it. There was a time where I just had thought about leaving because I really was fearful that if I continued with advocating for LGBT change here, that I wouldn't get promoted and tenured. And so then at some point I decided though, well, if I get fired for fighting for LGBT issues on this campus, then I don't want to be here anyway. Some people have to stay behind in places because if everybody who was like that just left, then everything would just stay the same. And I mean, I really, when it comes down to it, I like UT. And so it's sort of like out of care for the university that I want it to move along. And so I wouldn't be spending so much time and energy towards something if I didn't care. So I not only care about the institution and wanting to make it better, but I care about the faculty, staff, and students because I don't want them to have the same experience as when I came. I don't want them to feel isolated, for them to feel alone, and for them to feel like the university or the campus doesn't care for them. That's why. After the commission was started for a few years, the next large task that we took on was to start a center. Because again, going back to our first research, we asked, what would make campus better? The answer that kept coming up on and on again was, we need a space. We need some place that is central for us, some place that is doing programming, some place that is providing education for campus. It wasn't difficult. You look at lots of other universities and you see that they have LGBT centers. It was an easy thing to do, as all you had to look to your peers or look to those best universities and colleges to see what are they providing for LGBT students, faculty, and staff. And so then that's how we got around to, in 2008, asking for a space. And so that was a great feat. Again, we were very excited. We felt like we had accomplished something and we were being recognized and this is a very, big step forward. And then sort of the reality set in that we have this space, but we don't have any funding and we don't have any staff. So we were given the space in 2008. By the end of 2009, there still wasn't anything in that space. By the end of 2009, we were getting messages from administration saying, if you don't do something with this space, it's going to get taken away from you. So there's a group of us, and we were like, well, what are we going to do? How do we, with no money and no staffing, do this? It ended up being a few of us who were like, well, we'll share some of the budget that the commission has, and we'll share the graduate assistant that the commission has. So the graduate assistant will work a few hours, and then some volunteers will work a few hours, and we just need to show that this place is up and running and that we're doing something with this space. So then in February 2010, the center opened. It was a pretty big deal. There was over 200 people who came through that day and visited. So it was a big deal. It was something that no one on this campus really thought would ever happen here. And so, it just brought out lots and lots of people. People were like, I need to see this place, right? And so, for those first few years, I oversaw directing the center on a volunteer sort of basis. We had volunteers and we would do a few programs. It was very much sort of a grassroots sort of effort. Students had a space to sort of go to and, find each other, and we weren't part of campus. We were this other thing. We weren't an official office. We didn't have staff. If you look at all of the other, universities who have centers like these, they're folded into the university. They're given budgets, they're given staff. And we did try to collaborate a lot with other units and co-sponsor things. But again, we were sort of this other. Again, I think that we figured, we had our foot in the door and we're here. It's a lot harder to take something away that's already there than to never have it established.
What do you think it meant, having this space there?
For LGBT folks, it meant everything. Again, going back to the idea that visibility is a huge component of being out, of being who you are, and when we, as LGBT students, faculty, or staff, can point to a place that has a name, that is concrete, that is physical, we can say, we are represented here, we exist here, we belong here. Because until then, there was nothing that indicated to us that we belonged here on this campus. So I would say that it meant everything, especially we're the only LGBT center in the entire state at a public institution. So, we would have students come and tell us, I decided to come to UT because you had an LGBT center. That's how much it meant to them. They wanted to come to a university where they could finally be themselves. And so the fact that we had an LGBT center was an indicator to them of how this campus was going to be. There's so many things that come out of an LGBT center, like safe zone training, student leadership development programs. Those programs are not only for LGBT students, but they're also to help campus make allies of other students. So LGBT centers, maybe their main focus is to provide a space and provide programming and a sense of belonging for LGBT students, but the reach is much greater because really they're there to educate all of campus so that students, when they graduate, have been exposed to and can relate to LGBT people so that when they go out and they look for jobs, they're not coming from a little bubble, and so that's part of why the campus is here. And so the center, provided a lot of that. Retention has been a big issue here. One of our journey to the top 25, right? One of the main metrics is retention of undergraduate students, and so we know that one of the main reasons why students leave is they don't have a sense of belonging. They feel like they don't fit. Maybe the school's too big for them, or maybe it's too far away from home, but it can also be, that the campus feels hostile to them, that they don't feel safe because of maybe one of their identities. And so if we're serious about retention, then we should be serious about providing resources to marginalized students. I think it's very interesting how the concept of safe spaces has come up in the past year or so. I always think about, well, who has the problem with the safe spaces, right? Who are calling people out for having a safe space? And so, and then if we think about safe spaces beyond sort of the rhetoric, if I think to what we were doing at the Pride Center, we discussed issues of ableism, racism, classism. There was debates among LGBT factions. There was debates among conservatives and progressives. By no means did we all agree, ever. That's what made the place sort of like really exciting. And so the idea that the Pride Center or centers like it are a bubble or excluding ideas is really ridiculous to me, because being in that space and being around the students, it was one of the most engaging, intellectual, and vibrant places that I've seen on campus. There was so many conversations going on there every day about all types of different things that it would be, I think, a little silly to say that they were trying to protect themselves from ideas. And I would say, too, that the idea that we're coddling LGBT or marginalized students is, again, pretty ridiculous and silly. When I hear students talk about how they literally fear for their lives walking down the pedestrian walkway or walking in the fort, their concern is not that they'll hear something that makes them think. Their concern is that they're not going to get home. Believe me, I think that marginalized folks, people of religious minorities, and people of color, we've been exposed to others' ideas all our lives. It's not that we want to protect ourselves from those ideas. They exist and we acknowledge them. It's that because I'm different, I don't want to be killed. I don't want to be degraded and harassed by being called names on the way to class. There was something I just saw in the newspaper yesterday about campuses. They made the parallel. There was a Muslim woman student who said that someone tried to light her on fire, and then there was a conservative student who, was called out for supporting Trump. I think it was about conservative students now wanting safe spaces on campuses. The author of this sort of made that parallel of like, well, I don't like to be called a racist versus I was almost lit on fire. And so that's a very dramatic example, but sort of like what I'm trying to say is that they're not asking for a safe space so that they can hide away and get away from the world. They're more resilient than most people twice their age has had to be already. Wouldn't you like to go to a university that wasn't embarrassed of you and that kept your safety in mind or stood up for you when the space was vandalized or you were harassed? Wouldn't we all want that? How is that somehow wanting to be kept into a bubble? And then the other thing is that, if the idea of people who are critics of safe spaces feel like, oh, well, we need this bubble to be around only people who are like ourselves, then I would say that fraternities and sororities are safe spaces. Churches are safe spaces. Basically, anywhere where you have people coming together who share identities or values, those are safe spaces for them, but those safe spaces have always existed for them. And they don't see that as a safe space for them. But when someone else requests it, then it becomes, how dare you want to feel safe? The reason why Black cultural centers or international houses or women's centers came about to begin with is because universities were built for heterosexual, white, upper middle class men. That's who's the institutions were built for. And then as you bring more and more people in, institutions haven't fundamentally changed except to sort of like add these pockets of spaces. And so I would say maybe the university was the ultimate safe space for white, upper middle class, heterosexual cis men. So I think that the Pride Center, it did a lot. It was an indicator. It showed a university or any organization can talk about their commitment to diversity. No one in this day and age is going to talk against diversity outright, but whether or not they show that commitment to diversity by funding things or by standing up or advocating for things, like, I think that's where the difference came, in that it was an indicator. The day that it opened, one of our former legislators posted to his blog, why is the University of Tennessee funding such a place? It's just a hookup joint for students. Are you going to then open a center for people who have all different types of fetishes and falsely stereotyping LGBT people as some type of sexual deviants and assuming that we wanted an LGBT center so that we could meet up. I mean, it was just so childish, but that was Knoxville's senator at the time. And so we heard sort of through the grapevine that the chancellor had heard some pushback from legislators, and so whenever it would come up that we would sort of advocate for budget or things that we needed, we were kind of told, we've already taken heat for you and we're not charging you for the space, so let's just let it be. So again, like, just from that statement, the administration was treating us like we weren't part of campus, like we were some outside entity that was using this space that they felt they were doing us a favor by not charging rent to us when we were providing services for like our own students. But it was very telling of how they sort of saw us. So 3 years into the center being opened, the university hired a vice chancellor of diversity and inclusion. When that vice chancellor came on board, he looked at how the Pride Center was being operated. He was pretty surprised. And so he took us under his office. He gave us a budget. He worked with my dean at the libraries to buy out part of my time so that officially part of my time was being put towards the work of the center. It was another big momentous thing, like in the right direction. Here we were legitimized. We were now folded in. We're part of campus. We're part of, this Office for Diversity and Inclusion, which is, a cabinet level office. So again, like we're making progress. So under the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, we were brought in, we were part of campus. That was a big step for the Pride Center. Having that office there really did a lot. So things were going great. We were moving along. Our services at the Pride Center, our events, the programs we were able to provide to the students just continually were growing. Now we were open from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Students knew during those hours they could come in. If you looked at what we were doing and you looked at what some other schools were doing who were funded and staffed, we were doing comparable things. A lot less, but we were doing a lot for the campus. The center's name when we started out was the Outreach LGBT and Ally Resource Center, which is a whole mouthful. What do we do with this unwieldy name? And so in the summer of 2015, we decided to change the name to the Pride Center, which would be much more symbolic and less descriptive. So we want students to feel, no matter what their identities are, we want them to feel pride. So all of that was condensed in August of 2015 to the Pride Center. And then that same month, Vice Chancellor Hall asked me, hey, for the newsletter, will you write something up about gender-neutral pronouns and, being inclusive for trans students? And I said, sure. Because that was a question that the center got on a regular basis. Faculty would contact us and say, like, I have a trans student, but I'm not sure what to do. I don't want to offend the student. What should I do? Give me some tips. So I said, sure, I'll write up a little newsletter blurb. And that's when everything really changed. I always kind of say, laughingly, like, I didn't expect anyone, even who got the newsletter, to read it, because, like, who reads newsletters, right? I spent about maybe 30 minutes looking at other universities' websites and what they had about gender-neutral pronouns and things like that. And so I kind of crafted a little, blurb. And it was sent out and, like, didn't think anything more of it. Like, okay. Until I think it was the next day, and we learned that Fox News had picked it up and some other folks, some other news outlets had picked it up. And then after that, it was just almost like a firestorm. And I'd never been sort of in a situation that I guess would be considered like a communications crisis. I was getting emails from people I didn't know. We were getting phone calls. The Pride Center was getting phone calls. People saying all kinds of ugly things to the students. The article was being completely misinterpreted and sort of used as clickbait. So whereas in the article, I talk about, make sure you're using pronouns that a student would like you to use. Not all students use he or she. Somehow that was flipped around in headlines to say that, like, University of Tennessee bans he and she. Everyone must use gender-neutral pronouns. So the media, either on purpose or lazily, totally blew it on that by taking what I had said out of context. So it was up for a week. Everybody who was LGBT kind of felt pulled into this because it was legislators, it was alumni, it was people from around the country who don't go to UT, never went to UT, who all had an opinion on this 412-word article. And so we just felt caught in the middle. And I just remember telling the students, the article is there, it's still on the website, UT will do the right thing, it's going to be okay. We were getting interview requests from England, from France. We were getting bombarded with this sensationalized news item that had gone viral. So it was a really interesting time at the Pride Center. And again, like when you talk about the importance of place, we were all able to come together in that space and sort of process through this bizarre turn of events. We had gotten through it, and it seemed like things were starting to taper down as far as, the news cycle, and things weren't coming up as much. And then on a Friday afternoon, I was notified that this was the Friday before Labor Day holiday. We were notified that they were going to take the post down. They were going to make Vice Chancellor Hall's office take the post down. And that's just sort of where things changed. Whereas during the week we felt sort of resilient, even though it was difficult and kind of chaotic. When they took the post down, again, that you're going to make something invisible, that you're going to erase something. These are very profound issues for people who spend a lot of time of their lives hiding. They just felt devalued, basically tossed away, as if the university didn't think enough of them to sort of fight for them. And the way it was just sort of without any statement or anything, it was just sort of removed. It was one thing for it to be criticized and go through this whole thing, but it was another thing to be erased. Later in the fall, there was a call for an investigative panel where the chancellor and the president had to go and answer questions to the legislature. It didn't seem like they were too interested in that being a fight that they wanted to fight. At the end of that semester, there was a sit-in when, once again in December, there was a big flare-up about another short educational piece that was on the website about making sure that you're inclusive during the holiday season. It happened in the beginning of December. The students had a sit-in support of Vice Chancellor Hall and in support of inclusive holidays and as a continuation of being inclusive of LGBT people on campus. And while we were sitting in Chancellor's office, news outlets shared that that article had also been taken down and that Vice Chancellor Hall had lost control of his website. He would not any longer be in charge of putting up content on his own website. And so that's sort of where we ended in December 2015.
We will resume this interview in part 2.